A happy evening to all the participants. I take a lot of pleasure, delight, and it's privilege to welcome Mr. Anil Swarup ji. Please join me in welcoming sir. Sir, good evening and welcome to these leadership conversations.
Good evening.
It is such a delight for me personally and professionally that I'm able to fix up some time with you out of your busy schedule. And today, we are all going to be benefited by your presence and your insights drawn from your long experience in the IAS. Sir, I will make a brief introduction and then we will begin your opening remarks. Allow me to share my screen, please. WiseViews leadership conversations are typically held on Fridays 6:30 p.m. and we have so far completed 108, and we are very interestingly gathered here for 109th leadership conversation. Mr. Anil Swarup ji is going to talk about making things happen in the government. And after this introduction, sir will deliver the opening remarks, followed by Q&A and then a brief sum up. I think it will cross just about 60-70 minutes or so. I'm fortunate to make this introduction. Mr. Anil Swarup is a retired IAS officer of Uttar Pradesh cadre 1981 batch. Mr. Swarup, in his 38 years of career, has served in various capacities and later went on to become the secretary to the Government of India. He has served in various key positions for both the Union government and the Government of Uttar Pradesh, like as Education Secretary of India, Coal Secretary of India, Additional Secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat of India, Additional Secretary of Labour and Empowerment, Export Commissioner in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry of India, and as the District Magistrate of Lakhimpur Kheri. He became Secretary in the Coal Ministry after the coal scam in which the Supreme Court of India cancelled more than 200 blocks allocated since 1993. He is known as a fearless administrator. Mr. Swarup conducted coal auctions in a transparent manner, which was a huge success. In 2015, he was transferred to the Education Ministry when he refused to give coal produced by Coal India away at a discount to a privileged businessman. He has authored 3 books so far. They are Not Just a Civil Servant. The second one is Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. And the third one, No More a Civil Servant. I had the good fortune of reading Not Just a Civil Servant. It's an amazing book. All of you should actually pick up one copy and read that book. Among several recognitions, as a strategic thinker and an innovative leader, he won several awards and nominations, the prominent ones being nominated as one of the policy change agents by the Economic Times during the years 2010, 2012, 2015, and 2016, 4 times. And he was selected as one of the 35 action heroes in India, today's 35th annual edition. Mr. Anil Swarup is a postgraduate in political science from the University of Allahabad in 1978, where he was awarded Chancellor's Gold Medal for being the best all-round student. Thank you very much, sir, for agreeing to join us. And this is a wonderful profile. We couldn't have asked for more. I will also take a moment to introduce my esteemed colleague, Professor Prasad, who is heading the academic wing at ICFAI Group. He brings 3 decades of rich experience as an entrepreneur, as a corporate professional, and a successful academic now at ICFAI Group. He holds a BTech from IIT Bombay and a PGDM from IIM Kolkata. He published several books, articles, and also papers in conferences held in India and abroad. With this brief introduction, I welcome both of you. And sir, we've been waiting for this moment. Over to you, and we are all set to learn from you from now on, this moment onwards. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me here, and grateful to you for those very kind words that you mentioned. What a pleasure it is to be amidst you all here, and I look forward to this interactive session here. I won't make a very long speech. I'll make a short speech so that we can have this session more as an interactive mode than otherwise. But I have deliberately picked up this topic of making things happen in the government, because usually it is believed that not much happens in the government. Some of it may be true, but a lot does happen. And it is in the happening of what is happening that we can determine as to how it can be made to happen even more. So this has to be understood very clearly. The whole idea of making this presentation before you is to see how to make it happen. In fact, my second book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, could have been titled Making Things Happen in the Government, because that was my primary concern as I spent 38 years as a civil servant, to make things happen. What does it take to make things happen? I've always believed in order to find a solution to a problem, it is necessary to understand the cause of that problem. If you don't understand the cause of a problem, you'll be scratching the surface or probably making a few speeches here and there, but probably the solution to the problems will not come, action will not come. And that is why I thought of it a lot. While you are in service, you are in an action mode, you're trying to do things. It is post-retirement that you start reflecting on what happened. And that's when I came to this formulation that in India, it is very easy to have an idea. So if you walk down the street and ask a man on the street for any problem, he'll probably suggest a solution to you. Almost everyone has an idea about everything. It's not a dearth of knowledge that prevents action on the ground. So it's easy to have an idea, but for an idea to fructify and sustain, both are important. Not only should an idea fructify, because otherwise it becomes purely an academic discussion. And as a practitioner, I always believe that all ideas should lead to some concrete action on the ground, because man on the ground is not bothered about what you and I are discussing. Man on the ground is bothered about what actually happens ultimately on the ground. So for an idea to fructify, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, and emotionally relatable. That's quite handful. When I make this statement, almost everyone say that is why nothing happens in the government. No, it is despite the fact that these factors exist, a lot does happen in the government. And that is what I am going to tell you today. But let us first try and understand why these 7 aspects of happening are important to be understood for anything to happen on the ground. Now, even the best of ideas you have in a democracy, if the ultimate decision maker, who's a politician, does not get convinced about it, does not want to do it, then that idea will not happen on the ground. I'll give an extreme example here. We all have different views on whether there should be reservation in the country or not. I'm not giving an opinion on that, but my hunch is that if a referendum is held today in the country, probably there will be a referendum against having reservations. Now, can any political party today, despite this opinion, take a decision to do away with the reservation? No, I can't foresee any party even taking a stand against reservation, leave alone doing away with the reservation. So the reason that I am mentioning here is that when we propagate an idea, at least as an administrative level, or people who are doing businesses, one should be conscious of the fact that either the idea should be politically acceptable in the beginning, or we should be able to package the idea in a manner that it becomes politically acceptable. We civil servants and even otherwise have this habit of blaming politicians for all the wrongs in the society. Partly politicians, partly bureaucrats. But fact of the matter is that in my conversations with the politicians, in fact, that's going to be the title of my next book, My Encounters with Politicians. In that, I am trying to explain that, politicians are as good or as bad as most of us. They reflect what is happening in the society. But if a civil servant, or for that matter, anybody, has good communication skills and they are able to package their ideas appropriately, they will be able to get the politician to agree to them. I did a random survey of my career, and I discovered that almost in 90% of the cases, I could convince the politician to my point of view. In 10% cases, he overruled me, which is very fair. We live in a democracy. Ultimately, he has to have a final say. But the problem was with me, my inability to package an idea for him to accept that idea. Right from Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, where I was engaged in the policy making and then scheme formulation. Then I was engaged in the project monitoring group, in the coal auction process, in the coal policy, in formulation of education issues and policies. I came across politicians who were amenable, actually. They understood it. Provided, first, I was convinced about what I was saying, number one. Number two, I had the skills to convince the minister into believing what I wanted to believe. And this applies to the private sector also. When they talk to politicians, usually an outsider believes that without money, nothing moves in the government. which is so wrong. I've been on the other side of the fence. Now I'm outside the government. I'm not saying there's no corruption. There is corruption. But a lot of it happens in the government without having paid any money. And many people, if they reflect, they will discover that, a group, when he goes to the government and says something, it carries a lot of value. So, for example, if Mr. Narayan Murthy goes to any government officer or government somebody, they will immediately accept what he's saying, by and large, because he has those credentials. So there are many factors that ultimately determine political acceptability. Obviously, the politician has to say whether the suggestion that is being given to him or her is politically beneficial to him or not. After all, he's a political being and he wants to win elections. So it's not always that for money it happens. There are many cases personally, and there are quite a few of them have been narrated in my book already, that number of cases where I had a disagreement. In fact, I had disagreements even with the Prime Minister on certain issues, and lo and behold, he agreed with me on a number of occasions. There is a general impression about individuals. I am telling from my personal opinion. The first ever meeting that I had with the Prime Minister, we had a difference of opinion as Coal Secretary. And he agreed with me. The last meeting that I had with him, there was a difference of opinion on health insurance. Though I was school education secretary, I was invited to explain health insurance. Prime Minister had a different view on health insurance. But when I explained to him, he agreed. And today, the RSBA, the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, which was dumped at some point in time, has been revived as Ayushman Bharat. So it's not that it can't happen. The critical point is whether we are able to formulate it in a manner and present it in a manner that it becomes acceptable. So I'm starting by saying that an idea has to be either be upfront politically acceptable or made politically acceptable for it to survive, thrive, and sustain. Otherwise, it won't work. So that is one. The second is that it has to be socially desirable. Now, if you have an idea which may be politically acceptable, but the society doesn't accept it, then it won't last very long. And again, I'm giving a very extreme example. May not be the correct example, but just to illustrate my point, I don't know how many of you were there around in 1970s when family planning was brought to the fore. Now, it had political acceptability because a particular government was pushing it, but it did not have social desirability. It was rejected. And in fact, ultimately, the government fell. And one of the reasons that is attributed is that this family planning policy. So again, what I want to say here is, if an idea is not socially desirable, you can actually make it socially desirable. It is not necessary for every idea to be upfront socially desirable, but you can evolve communication channels, you can evolve approaches, you can reach out to stakeholders and make them acceptable. So it has to be politically acceptable and socially desirable. The third, again, is very important, especially in present day context. It has to be technologically feasible. Now, why I say technologically feasible? Because, technology has sometimes become a fashion without understanding the implications of what we are trying to do. Technology can be a game changer, absolutely no doubt about it. But one has to be very clear in our mind that the idea that we are espousing, whether the current technology is good enough to carry that idea forward. Let me give you an example. When I became education secretary in 2016, we had this problem of shortage of teachers. So one of the advisors, and I had many of them, advisors from here or across the Atlantic, they were, used to call them Rai Sahabs. They had advised, probably they wouldn't have done much on the ground, but they always had an advice. So one of those advisors came and told me, sir, why are you bothered? Why don't you set up these smart screens in the schools and webcast it centrally so everyone's school that you don't require a teacher? Now, this guy had no clue about technology at that point in time. In 2016, India was not connected. All schools were not connected through internet. Even now, large number of schools are not connected, but maybe 10 years down the line, all schools will be connected. So we should be aware of the limitation of the technology when we suggest a technology. I'm not saying that if you don't have the technology backup at this point in time, it will not appear later. No. What I'm saying is you have to be aware and conscious of the appropriateness of the technology that you have at that point in time for it to be implemented. So it has to be technologically feasible. That's the point I'm trying to make here. The fourth point is very, very important. It's important because in UP we say, "Jeb mein nahi patta, chal diya Kolkata." This is financial viability, meaning thereby that for an idea to fructify, you have to have money in your pocket, no? How do you make an idea happen, even if it is politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, but you don't have the money? Look at a wonderful, wonderful national education policy. It's one of the finest documents that I've seen. It covers all aspects of education. But what is the problem there? Dr. Kasturi Rangan and his team very conveniently said that for doing what we said, you have to allocate 6% of the GDP to education sector. No, he said, and he's gone. And he's gone because he doesn't have to implement it. Where is the money for that? Where is 6%? The highest allocation to education since independence has been 3.1%. And I don't see even that happening now. Because, government has its limitations. The government has its problems. No, you can't say that I have these list of ideas and for this so much money is required. It's your problem. Money can't be a problem of the person who's receiving the idea. I think money should be a problem of person who's giving the idea also. He should be able to suggest where is the money going to come from. And let me give you an example here. And I'm not saying all the money could have come. When Dr. Kasturi Rangan came to meet me and I was education secretary, school education secretary, and he asked me for my suggestion, I jokingly and half seriously told him that you are wasting your time. He said, why? You all have set up this committee. I said, you will come up with a fantastic report without telling us how to do it. I told him, along with this policy, you must have the following. Number one, what is the problem? How it can be solved? Who would do it? By when it would be done? When you have a detailed action plan along with a policy, which should be mandated for every policy, you will understand the limitations of that policy. So had Dr. Kasturi Rangan and his team gone into the details of this education policy on how it will be implemented and who will implement it, they would have discovered from each segment how much money would be required. At least they would have worked out some approximate number, and then they would have worried about where is this money going to come from, rather than merely telling the government that you arrange for the money. That's not my problem. That's your problem. It can't be that way. And one reason why most of the policies or large number of policies flounder in India is the policy makers are not tasked to implement that policy. Obviously, they can't be tasked, but they can have the vision to understand as to how that policy will be implemented so that their suggestions could be more implementable. Obviously, they can give some ideas beyond implementation also, but that segregation has to be made. Another point. Now, if I know that I do not have 6% of the GDP as desired by the policymakers, then I would say, okay, if I have 5%, these are my priorities. If I have 4%, these are my priorities. If I have 3%, these are my priorities. If I have 2%, you can then say that if so much money is available, these are critical aspects of the policy. They should be implemented. I'll give you another example. I'm going to the details of this because I feel that a wonderful national education policy, and many states are struggling with it because they don't have the money to do it. There are certain aspects of the education policy which do not require so much money, and they're very critical in nature. For example, the whole issue of teachers. The suggestions given by the policymakers in the national education policy relating to teachers do not require too much investment. In fact, that should have been the first top priority. I was convinced, and I'm not an educationist, I just had some experience, that teachers are pivotal to school education in this country. I don't know about higher education. If we take care of problems relating to teachers, which they can be, then a lot of improvement can come about in education. And mind you, the suggestions given by the policymakers in the national education policy are such relating to teachers that they would not require so much money. The point that I'm trying to illustrate here is, it is not that money should upfront become available, but we should have that at the back of our mind when we provide suggestions. That's how things happen in the government. Otherwise, there will be brilliant ideas sitting somewhere and things will not happen in the government. So the policymakers have to work in tandem and they have to be realistic in terms of where and how to. I'll give you an example how they could have possibly suggested more money for education. Government will already be strapped for money, but there was an occasion where, in my personal view, and many people disagree with me, that why have this double standard towards private education? Why can't we encourage private schools? Why can't we allow profit in private schools and tax it? In any case, I am aware that a lot number of private schools are making profit. They're not showing us profit. My contention was allow them to make profit and tax it. At least you'll get some more money to pump in areas that you can, and so on and so forth. You can have other suggestions. So this is as far as the financial viability is concerned. Then we come to the administrative doability. What is administrative doability? You can have a great idea. You can have political acceptability, social desirability, technological feasibility, even finance is available. But if you don't have human resources, how would you make an idea happen on the ground? Look at health, I mean, government is allocating quite a substantial amount of resources to health, but you don't have doctors in the field. You don't have paramedical people in the field. It's not on account of shortage of fund. We just don't have them. So without planning the human resource, and to me, human resources are critical because ultimate operation of any idea happens through human beings. So you have to take care of human resources if an idea has to work on the ground. So human resource, they assume very, very important aspect, and hence administrative doability becomes a very important component. Then comes the judicial tenability. Now, this is very important because we live in a democracy where obviously, if you give an idea which is contrary to law, it won't work. So you have to examine the judicial tenability of any idea that you have. Government gets dragged into courts in a number of cases and it delays everything because people challenge the constitutionality, the legality of what the government does. And for that matter, even the private domain, if you go to the government, and I keep telling private sector people, I have interacted with a lot of industry, I've been telling them that when you go to the government, don't say, Hamari maange puri ho, chahe jo majburi ho. You put yourself in the shoes of the person you're going to, and then come up with the practical suggestions and be a partner with the government. Of course, they are not to be blamed alone. I think government is equally to be blamed. They should treat industry and non-governmental sector as partners. Unfortunately, on some occasions, we don't do that, and both suffer. Slightly digressing a bit, my contention during my career was that there are outstanding people in the private domain, there are wonderful people in the government domain, but unfortunately, they don't come together. All the rascals and the ruffians of the world come together and make life difficult for us, but we keep cursing each other. Sitting in the private sector, people will say everyone in the government is corrupt. Everyone in the government will start thinking that everyone in private sector is making money. Obviously, they're making money. They're good people on both sides. And that's why post-retirement, I started this movement called Nexus of Good, where the idea is to bring the good people together wherever they stand. So if you want to make things happen, get the good people together. Let not bad people come together and make life difficult for you. So one important way of going about making things happen is get the good people together. So judicial tenability is important, though it is unpredictable on most of the time. You don't know which side the judgment is going to come. But on the people who are approaching the judiciary, they must be very careful, especially the civil servants. They should be very careful that whatever they do is judicially tenable. And finally, the seventh dimension was added when there was this agitation of farm laws. I was personally of the view that there may have been one or two shortcomings in the laws, but they were indeed beneficial to the farmers, to the country's economy. They're wonderful laws. But what went wrong? It was politically acceptable. It was socially desirable. It was technologically feasible. It was financially viable. It was administratively doable. And judiciary had not struck down those laws, at least till the time they were withdrawn. What was wrong? Probably at the government level, they were unable to market this idea to the stakeholders. It's very important to take the stakeholders into confidence, make them believe that what you're doing to them is beneficial to them. If that happens, the idea will work. So I'm repeating against these 7 dimensions. I'm saying that any idea to fructify and sustain over a period of time, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, and emotionally relatable. If this happens, the chances of that idea sustaining on the ground are much more, and you can make things happen. Things don't happen because we flounder on one or two or more of these aspects that I've mentioned. I have tried to structure it. While in service, I did not have this structuring, but post-retirement, I reflected on my own career. And I said, if I did manage to do a few things, whether in coal or as head of the project monitoring group or a little bit in education, it was an account of my ability to convince the politician to get the money for the schemes that I had, to get the technology to do it, to get the administrative structure going, to see that whatever I did is not challenged. In fact, as coal secretary, we won every case that was challenged in the court of law. So it was judicially tenable. And I was very hung up on taking stakeholders on board. I think if you have to make things happen on the ground, you have to take stakeholders on board. And one reason why Mr. Arun Jaitley succeeded in getting GST is that he was a great negotiator. He sat with stakeholders. He sat with states, and that's why GST happened. These days we have that problem because center is at war with the states, which doesn't work. You have to take stakeholders on board. I can go on and on. Talking is the easiest thing to do, but I would rather have an interactive session and take your questions now. Now that you have allocated 20 minutes, I have overshot it by a minute, but we can discuss this now. Thank you very much.
Amazing, sir. Amazing. Thank you very much for these opening remarks. This comes from years of distilled experience and the wisdom that you have put together. And the 7 commandments of making things happen in government is extremely useful, not just for government, but I'm sure it is useful for private sector and all the other sectors as well. When somebody says we have to take stakeholders into confidence before we move the idea, is it not applicable anywhere? It is applicable even on playground for students in the school. It is applicable in the kitty party, wherever it is done. It's applicable in the highest level of boardrooms discussions that happen in the private sector, and for that matter in government as well. I'm sure, I think these are deeply rooted for making things happen. These are emanating from a very important factor that you're driven to make things happen, and therefore a framework has come. I'm sure it is extremely useful. This is a fantastic background for having Q&A right now, and we are eagerly waiting for that. And one moment I take to acknowledge the fact that there are several luminaries who have joined today for this session. I welcome all of them for their patience and for taking their time to join us. We will now begin the Q&A, sir. I'll request Professor Prasad to start the cluster number 1. Over to you, Professor Prasad, and thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Thank you, sir, for encapsulating your entire experience with relation to this particular title in such simple terms. And as Professor Rao said, when we look at it, it is applicable even to an organization, except that the words may have slightly different connotation. I think excellent, sir. I'll get straight down to the questions. The first question is, can you narrate 2 high impact use cases, sir? 2 different ministries where you have applied this and finally, you got good outcomes out of it.
So let us look at coal. When I joined as coal secretary, it was crisis, and crisis. In fact, when I was posted as coal secretary, I didn't know much about the sector. So I rang up a friend of mine and asked him, "Yaar, coal sector kaisa hai?" Usne kaha, "Gangs of Wasipur dekhi hai kya?" So that settled everything. One understood how troublesome it was. But whatever little success were achieved was an account of taking stakeholders into confidence. And stakeholders was the Prime Minister himself, my minister, the state governments, which are very, very important stakeholders. So we engaged with them. I must tell you that during my tenure as coal secretary for 2 years, I didn't have a single meeting in Delhi. I may have been the only secretary government of India who was engaging with the states, not taking meeting in Delhi. I used to go down to the states and convey a value proposition to the states. Now, this is very, very critical. If you want to sell your idea and you want to make things happen, the so-called adversary or your partner, he must understand that what you are saying is beneficial to him. Because if that doesn't happen, your idea will not travel much of a distance. I'll give you a single instance. There are many such instances, and many of them have been narrated in my book. But one I must narrate. Mr. Mamata Banerjee was going hammer and tongs against the center. And West Bengal has a lot of coal. So Coal India wanted land for mining coal. So how do you approach that? Because politically it was impossible. So I went over to Kolkata. The chief secretary, who was junior to me, but I went over to his room, had a cup of tea, and I took a piece of paper with me in which I had written, by not allocating land to Coal India, the state government is losing the following by way of revenues, by way of employment. And I gave him a half a page handwritten note. And I told him that I can write this to you in a formal letter, and maybe 5 years down the line, the CAG will say that the state government lost our revenue and things like that. I don't want that. I don't want a CAG report. I want action. So I told him, why don't you tell the chief minister that keep politics apart. This is economics. The state government stands to benefit and central government doesn't have a single penny, except that the fact that the coal production of the country will increase and we are in a crisis. I don't know what he did to the chief minister. We got the land in West Bengal. Unthinkable at that point in time. So there are many such examples where engaging with, the question here is, whenever you go to talk to somebody, you have to keep these factors in mind and understand the person as to what is of interest to him. If that you can do, things will happen. Similarly in education, a totally different sector. Totally different sector. Now, CBSE board exams had happened. one examination paper had leaked. Now, as Secretary School Education, I was not directly related to CBSE, but it's a part of the education system. On that particular day of the leak, I was in Dehradun attending to my ailing father, and the situation was bad in Delhi. Now, the chairman of CBSE rang me up and said, sir, this is the background and all health seems to have broken loose. So I told her, why don't you tell the facts to the media? So she said, okay, I'll ask the minister. And when she spoke to the minister said, no, it's not necessary. So no one spoke to the media. By the time I returned my dad in the morning, it had exploded beyond anyone's imagination. So I went and met the minister. I told him, sir, so before I could say anything, he said, we'll have to remove chairman CBSE. So I said, why, sir? His situation will need to be diffused. Now here, again, I had to package my next sentence to the minister in a manner so that my idea became acceptable. I had asked him earlier, sir, if the chairman CBSE is not to be faulted, it's not a fault at all. Why should we penalize her? And then I told him, sir, you think, sir, the media is after her? Sir, she is acting as a buffer between you and the media. The moment you remove her, the media will be after you. Now, this struck. He did not rule chairman CBSE. The rest, of course, say, as they say, history. One of the finest officers, she became Secretary of School Education herself. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you understand the people around you and you structure your communication in that manner, you can salvage a position, you can do a lot many things. I can go on and on. In fact, my entire book is about this.
Fantastic, sir. You remind me of how people negotiate and do sales, where you look at the other person's benefit, you look at what the other person wants, and then you package the communication accordingly. Absolutely, I think that's coming out very clearly. Thank you, sir. I go to the next point, sir. You did mention in the beginning about the title and what actually happens. There is this feeling, perception, I would say, still in the comment that, one of the comments has come in the chat box already that, it looks as if we have to meet God in order to meet the government. So there is this perception that, things don't happen as you mentioned, it's a perception. At the same time, there is also this perception that many bureaucrats only administer. Of course, there are people who take initiative, and those who take initiative are few. So how can this change? If it's a perception at the perception level, if it's a reality at the reality level?
Again, as I said, my book explains at length what needs to be done. Now, let me first disabuse people on what the government is. Outsider treats government as a monolith, which is wrong. It is true of businesses as well. We can't treat every business as corrupt. We can't treat any businessmen as avaricious. They are good, bad, and ugly. If there are Malayas, there are Narayan Murtis as well. Similarly, in the government, there are good, bad, and ugly people. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the government, the good work of the government doesn't get to be known, or officers. It doesn't get to be known. In any case, sir, in India, we are really fond of masala. So we want negative news. Without that, we are not energized without masala. So we want masala. So if newspapers was to publish good stories about civil servants, who's going to read it? They would want, ye pakda gaya, isko yahan le gaya, isko jail mein band kar diya. But by definition, they are news. And news by definition is an exception. And as our nature is, we start believing in that is not an exception, it's a rule. Look at the tragedy of it. That's the human nature, that things will not get published in newspaper if they're not exceptions. Okay. So if an officer gets caught taking a bribe, if every officer is taking a bribe, it will not get published in the newspaper. Since some of them do take bribe and get caught, it gets published in newspaper. But our psyche is such, the moment it gets published, all are. So that is one. Second, what could be our role in changing this perception? And now I'm outside the government, and I'm busy doing that. There are all sorts of bureaucrats, good, bad, and ugly. Now, if we keep talking only about the bad people, and if bad people continue to thrive, the fence sitters will think it is nonsense to become a good officer. No one appreciates me. So I might as well make some money. If I get caught, I'll manage it. Now, if I and you start appreciating the good work and recognizing good work, the chances are many fence sitters will start believing there is recognition for good work, and hence try and do good work. So my job, and that's what I'm doing post-retirement, highlight good work that is happening, recognize good work. Once that happens, there could be a chance that many civil servants who are still undecided about it will think in terms of going toward the side where they get to be appreciated. Now, everyone wants to be appreciated. Who doesn't want to be appreciated? But hum muktkan se burai karte hain, muktkan se taarif nahi karte. So how about as common citizens, I'm not saying don't be critical. Please be critical of what wrong that is happening in the bureaucracy or bureaucrats are doing wrong. Be critical, but be equally appreciative of the good work that you get to know. And there's a lot of good work that is happening. If you want to know about good work, go to the Nexus of Good portal. Hundreds of positive stories you'll find both in the government and the private domain. Let's appreciate that. Let people feel good about doing good. We don't make them feel good about doing good. We only make them feel bad about doing bad. So it's incumbent on us to see that we appreciate the good work. And there are a host of them. I mean, my third book, No More a Civil Servant, has 25 such case studies of outstanding work being done by a variety of civil servants and another 25 by a variety of NGOs. So there's a lot of good work that is happening. So what we need to do is, whereas we should criticize what is wrong, we should equally appreciate the good work that is happening around us.
Fantastic, sir. I think the message is pretty clear. Each of us, in whatever role we play, if we can do something about it, including this institution, I think we would have done a bit for it.
Join the Nexus of Good.
Yes.
Just go to the portal and it's very simple. Join. Become a member of Nexus of Good.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Next question. I also noticed that you are in the Department of Labor. So this question is related to that. The 2023 report of the Economic Intelligence Unit, though it has rated India better on business environment, the weak point find was that of India's labor force participation, which is known and has been written about. Now, what are the links and what do you think the government can do, sir?
There's a lot that can be done. We have become notorious on this front. I mean, as a part of the labor ministry, I was of the view that a lot of labor laws should be scrapped because they are more harassing in nature rather than enabling in nature. I am all for labor rights, but the manner in which we are conducting ourselves, I don't think. But what happens is there's so much vested interest in sustaining that. So, for example, I had clear indicated, I had earlier been in the state also where I had suggested that we should be careful about the rights of the labor, not the rights of the inspector. To give you an example, if a boiler gets burst, I've yet to come across an instance where the labor inspector who had given a certificate or the boiler inspector who had given the certificate to the boiler was also sacked. The point is, how in the hell did he give certificate? My personal view was that we should go into the volunteer certification of labor laws, or for that matter, most of the laws. Why do we have a whole army of inspectors going down to find out? And there are many ways it can be done. Instead of giving the authority to the labor inspector to walk into any industry, this authority should be taken away from him. I told you very. It is not that inspection will not happen. Inspection will happen, but that daroga of that particular area, or who has an area where he can go and inspect, that should be dispensed with. So if there is a complaint against somebody, I mean, each industry should be asked to find voluntary disclosures, and then there should be a random test of whether that is being done or not in that particular unit. And that testing would be done not by the local man, but who's outside. So the link between the inspector and the industry that exists at the local level needs to be broken. It has already been done in income tax. Income tax, the darogas are no more there. You don't have that area divided where you have SSCs, where you have to contact an income tax officer. They've done away with income tax. Similar thing could be done in labor laws and other laws. So that is one. If we can somehow come up with such a provision, which can be done. The problem here is that we are neither able to protect the rights of the labor, nor we are able to encourage industry. So we have to protect the rights of the labor, but I don't think Inspector Raj has existed, at least till that when I was there, is a way of going about protecting the rights of labor. There are many other things that can be done, but owing to positive time, I'm only touching upon some of them.
Excellent, sir. Very practical. Also, another additional benefit is a lot of perceptions of people in this particular audience about how much government can do and how much bureaucrats indeed understand what is happening. I think that's coming through very clearly.
Another point, since you make this point, I have been obsessed with doing away with physical interface between the common man and the government. Now today you have technology to do that. I'd like to mention an organization called Samagra. I think your institute should study that. They are doing that in Haryana. They have identified the processes under which a common man interfaces with the government, and they have listed out 500 such processes. They have already digitized more than 300 processes where the common man doesn't have to go to any government office to get the benefit. So if that happens, if you can do away with physical interface, I think corruption levels will come down.
Excellent suggestions, sir. Excellent suggestions. Now, we'll touch upon another angle from a common man point of view. And for instance, just if you take transport infrastructure, particularly roads, it's a daily struggle for most citizens. Parking on roads is a menace. And though complaints are filed, including digitally, the response is lacking. Now, what do you think should be done to get the system to work without having to tweet the minister, for example?
No, you don't have to see. The point is, let us admit a few things here. Socially and culturally, we are people who are always in rush. You know, I just returned from Germany and I spent some time in Belgium. The people are patient. They will allow you way. Here, all the time is sought to be covered on the road. That's why you have this traffic problem. If we have that patience, probably we will not have that much problem. This extends to parking also. You know, no one would want to, if they're not forced to park in a particular manner, they would not do it. So this creates a larger social problem where we are trying to occupy limited space in whichever manner that we have. And hence we have this problem. Now, I don't think minister or government alone can do that. I think there has to be a lot of social awareness in societies that you are living. You know, look at societies. I've seen here in Delhi, they come to fisticuffs regarding parking and how the car is parked. Padhe likhe log, people who are educated. So I don't think government alone can do that. This has to become a social discourse. It has to come in social domain. Let us start with smaller colonies where, you know, people are well-read, well-bred, and a lot of money live. They can't live in harmony with each other to do that. What can government do about it? You know, you can't expect government to discipline everyone if we don't want to discipline ourselves. You know, today it is shocking that you find the best of cars moving around, throwing things out of the window. It's not that they're not educated. It's not that they don't have money. Somehow it has evolved. Look at the good work that is happening. I mean, now I've said that people do this. Look at what has happened in Sikkim. You know, when I go to that state and if I go to Gangtok, it is incredible. No one throws anything anywhere except in the dustbin. The streets are clean. It's not merely the government that is doing. The whole society has come to clean it up. So I think it has more to do with the discipline that we have to develop. And that can be done because I see pockets of this country. I had the occasion to visit Indore, you know, amazing city. And not merely the government. Government obviously has to play an important role, but I think people have to come along. That's why, you know, in the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned about public-private partnership. And I'm a great believer in taking non-governmental organization or civil society organization because government's conversation with the common man is on a different platform altogether. If this conversation can be had through civil society organization, that conversation will be much more impactful because it is not through force, it is more through persuasion. And persuasion part will come more from the civil society organization as compared to the government. So the government and the private have to work in tandem. Government alone cannot do it. Private alone cannot do it. I think the two have to come together. And in such cities where they have come together, they have managed to transform those areas. Sikkim, the entire state being one of them.
Excellent, sir. I think you have suggested that this is a larger social cultural issue. You also suggested a way out as to what can happen. Thank you, sir. I'll come to another question. The last one I'll take in this cluster. There are more, but you know, time is at paucity. So there is a strong feeling that decisions are swung in favor of big businesses in that industry when discussions take place, irrespective of the government in many cases. How can one improve things here?
I have worked a lot on that. The moment you start making decision-making process a transparent one, then favors would become increasingly difficult. I'm not saying they will get eliminated. Both corruption and favors will come down because transparency is the key to solving this problem. Today, we have the technology to do that. I'll give you an example. When I took over as head of the project monitoring group in the cabinet secretariat, at that point in time, this is 2013, where CWG scam, Commonwealth Games scam, coal scam, 2G scam, all scams had broken. And my task was to fast track projects each of which was more than 1,000 crore at a time when officers had stopped taking decisions because of CBI, this, that, and everything. Now, to cut a long story short, we managed to facilitate clearance of 5 lakh crores worth of project in 15 months. Unthinkable. And not a finger was pointed. People ask me, how did you manage to do that? I said, simple. I made the whole process totally transparent. So the world knew who's sitting on which file for how many hours, how many minutes, how many seconds. No matter how inefficient I am, to the world, I'd like to appear to be efficient. So we will push the files. So one of the primary problems is the delay in decision making. Again, the decision itself was exposed to the public. So there was nothing under the table. So if everything is open, so if on a particular principle, I sanctioned something to you on the same principle, since it's there in public domain, I'll have to do it for Sudhakar also. So I can't discriminate between the two. Much of the problem of delays and corruption, they all happen because of opacity in governance. I'm convinced that if you make the processes transparent, if you make the delivery transparent, if not eliminated, corruption and this favoritism will be reduced dramatically. I've seen it from very close quarters in coal, which I did that. I don't think anyone pointed any finger in the coal things that we did. I mean, it's been 7 years now. No one has come knocking on my door, fortunately so far. So the issue here is whether I am using technology to make things transparent. It not merely helps the recipient, it helps the civil servant himself. You can save your backside as a civil servant if you can tell the world that you've taken decision. Let me give you another example. It is not that I took all the correct decision as coal secretary. At that point in time, not many officers wanted to commit on the file. So some of the recommendations initiated at my level, probably for the first time in the history of this country, at secretary level. And in some cases, I took a wrong decision because they were being rushed. Immediately, I get, all decisions that we took were put on the portal immediately. So within an hour, I get a call, sir, how did you look at this? He was not the lowest bidder. So we went back, examined the files, found that I was wrong. In the morning, I corrected it. Morning, called a press conference, admitted that I had committed a mistake and corrected it. So to commit a mistake is human, but your bona fides will not be questioned if you are transparent, because it will get to be known that a wrong decision was taken. You can always correct it. So it can be done.
Superb, sir. I think it's a fantastic use case for virtually any industry, any system.
Since you say industry, let me give you another incident here. Mr. Kumaranangam Birla came to meet me. No, he didn't see any file on my table. He said, sir, this is for the first time that I see a Secretary Government of India without a file on the table. So I told him, I have digitized everything. There's no physical paper or file in my office. So he said, how did you manage to do that? So I explained to him how I digitized everything. Then he turned towards his 2 CEOs who were sitting on 2 sides of him. He said, why can't we do that in our office? I told him, you won't be able to do it. He said, why? I said, I can afford to be transparent. You can't afford to be transparent.
I think spot on, sir. Spot on. With that, we come to the end of this cluster. I hand it back to Professor Rao.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been an amazingly interesting session, like all your previous sessions that I have attended in person, as well as the sessions online. The beauty of your conversation is so much applicable, so much useful that if one were to make notes, it runs into pages. In the last half an hour or so, I think I've been making very, very interesting notes. I am sure everyone around the screen is also doing the same thing. And there are lots of questions that are coming up. I will have to now do a prioritization. But before we get into the first question, sir, I request the participants, if they have any additional questions to ask the leader, they may raise their hand and I'll open the mic for them. I'll just go to the first question. The first question is a very curious question, I'm sure, based on your work, based on what they've observed with government at various levels, they have come up with this thing. The question is, has the government machinery become more receptive to digital interfaces, or face-to-face interaction is still preferred? It is not restricted to Delhi, it's generally across the country. I think this question is based on that observation.
My understanding is technology is catching up, and the government officers are also finding it useful to use technology. A lot needs to be done, but I see the change. I see the change happening at the district level, at the state level, and the central level. Technology is more and more coming into governance, and that's good. That's good because that will bring in transparency, that will bring in accountability. Because as I said, in my case, as Secretary Education, I don't think any file could be pending at a level beyond a time, because everyone knew that I could know that where is the file sitting without going anywhere. Digitally, I could know. So I didn't even have to ask anybody, please send me this file. The files came in time because the potential of my knowing who's sitting on which file for how much time.
That's amazing. Already powerful civil servant has become much more powerful because of this information digitally. I think managing your own staff as at the same time managing the load of work that is pending to be addressed is understood at the same stroke. I will take this question from Mr. Rajesh Wadhwa, sir. Request Mr. Rajesh to open your mic and speak. Yeah.
And your,
Sir,
and your video
sir,
as well. I would like to see your face.
absolutely,
Behind.
sir.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see me, sir?
No, it's unfair, I say, because you can
Can
see
you be
me
more
on
transparent?
Yeah, I'd like to be very transparent, of course, but you can hear me, I'm sure.
Right, please go ahead, ask your question.
Sir, thank you very much. The previous question was actually sent by me only. And I'm a student, I'm a research scholar with ICFAI University. Sir, my point was, I specifically asked because there are few issues which are very peculiar. They are not the routine run of the things. Like you said in Haryana, they are trying something like, routine issues, 500 odd can be handled. Now, this question propped up because I had to conduct an ultra marathon from my company in a forest. And I had to personally go and meet the conservator of forest in Dehradun. He gave the approval, but down the line, just for small fee to be paid, the thing got stuck. And I had to really make amends. So this time on my own 60th birthday, I'm planning a 60-kilometer ultra marathon to the same forest. So I was just thinking I'll plan well in advance that this very one-off kind of a thing, which probably cannot be handled just on an email, will probably require personal connection. So how is the government receptive to this? So
See,
this is
you must, when you interface with the government, you put yourself in the shoes of the officer there. Mr. Rajesh Wadhwa may be a very genuine person doing that marathon in the forest, no doubt about it. But there will be many Rajeshes who would do it for an ulterior motive. Now, how does the officer sitting here know whether you have an ulterior motive or a right motive? That's what the problem is. And the other issue is, if everything is right, nothing happens. If one thing goes wrong, that officer faces trouble. One thing goes wrong, his entire career goes for a shot. So I don't have time to explain that aspect. Even that can be taken care of. Maybe if they invite me to Hyderabad, I'll have a longer session with you face to face, and probably I'll be able to explain to you. But you must sympathize with the people who have to take a decision as well. You can't say, "Hamari maange puri ho, chahe jo majburi hai, hame jaldi kar dijiye." You must also think the other side. When I talk to officers, I tell them, how do you take care of such an issue? How do you keep your backside safe? It's very important, because you must have heard of these 5 C's, CBI, CVC, CAG, courts, and CIC. They can take you to cleaners. So it's an inhibiting factor. So please empathize with them. But I'm sure this time, with your past experience, you will get your permission quickly.
Great, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. But the message that we got is that the government's digital interfacing abilities are preparedness are changing quite fast, and that is something very, very heartening to note. I'll request Kritik V to ask the question. Over to you, Kritik. Yeah, please unmute yourself. But there's an interesting question while he's trying to meddle with his mic. That is, sir, in policy making, who injects new ideas? It is the civil servant to the ministers, or ministers to civil servant, and he makes it much more creative? Where does it begin in general in your experience?
In formulation of a policy, inputs come from all over the place. And no one can claim a monopoly over that. No civil servant can say it was my idea. No politician can say it was my idea. There are non-governmental organizations, there are expert organizations. There are a lot of input that comes in for new ideas, for developing this idea. So policy making is a very complex process. It doesn't happen just like that. In some cases, yes, someone gets a good dream in the night and announces in the morning, but they're very rare cases.
So policy making is a very complex process, and inputs may have to come from variety of sources.
I have a full session on how policies are formulated in the government. Maybe someday when you want, I can explain that to you.
You have already indicated 3 separate sessions so far, sir. I am keeping track. I'm keeping track, and I'll be very, very happy to request you for that later. Now, we'll request Dr. Lakshman to raise his question.
Hi, sir. It's extremely happy to talk to you, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
Dr.
sir. Yes, sir. So I have a question. Let's say, for example, in the city level, sir. So there was an IAS officer, and there was many political people assigned in their jobs, and the IAS officer is also assigned in the same job, and he is the key decision maker in that particular aspect. And many monitor terms involved in that particular aspect. So he was a very genuine and very foreseeing, very knowledgeable, of course. And they were not that understanding comparable with the IAS officer at that particular time. And so at this time, he was cornered and he was pressurized to go on for to complete the task. He was cornered and pressurized, and he was very knowledgeable, and those guys were not. And at this particular time, his emotional levels, the IAS officer emotional levels, was very pressurized. And how can he manage himself at that particular situation to go forward and make the things happen positively for himself, emotionally, and to the society, sir? And if this answer, I'm expecting that can be useful to every person who works in the corporate.
You read my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, and give one copy to that concerned officer. The situation that you mentioned, there are at least 15 such situations in that book, if not more, where you felt cornered. But if your antenna is correct, and if you know how to sort out issues, I can tell you from my personal experience, in the first 10 to 15 years of my career, I was under pressure. Thereafter, I had absolutely no dilemma. I was clear in my mind as to how to handle the situation, whether it was coal block auction, under pressure from the topmost person, whether it was the education sector. So I've been under pressure. So that's how life is. If you join civil service, you will be under pressure, but you should know how to handle pressure. Now, this session may not be good enough for me to explain to a civil servant as to how should he handle a pressure. For that, you'll have to read that book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. Maybe if he organizes another session on the book, Ethical Dilemmas, I'll be able to explain that to you. But I can't do that right now because it is much more elaborate. It's much more complex as to what are the pressures that a civil servant faces. And I can go situation by situation on how exactly can he handle it. You can handle pressure.
Amazing. That promises a very useful session for all the young officers in the civil services right now. And I'm sure we should be able to do that in Hyderabad very soon. I'll be able to handle that, sir. Let me see. Thank you, Lakshman, for asking that question. We'll move to Kritik. He was trying to ask a question. Over to you, Kritik.
Thank you, sir. One of my questions is, how large of a role do you think corruption plays in decisions made by the government? Like, say, a senator would be, or a member of parliament would be controlled through methods like bribery, blackmail, or threats of harmful actions such as assassination or harm towards loved ones. I've heard about many stories. There's many works of fiction regarding the corruption that takes place in the justice system, governmental systems. How big of a problem do you think that is in the Indian government, and how big of a role does it play in certain decisions, such as housing for the poor, where the people heading the staff would instead put their friends in instead? That's just an example.
So I haven't done any survey to determine the exact quantum or percentage, but I can tell you from my experience, corruption exists at various levels. And then I'll tell you, broadly speaking, what is more corrupt and what is less corrupt. At the policy level, I don't think there is much corruption in India. There could be some cases here and there where policy itself gets formulated to benefit some people. I can't deny that. But by and large, since I've been part of a large number of policy formulations, I didn't see any. There could be pressure groups coming in, but there's no corruption. Obviously, whoever has an interest will try and influence a decision. but there's no money changing hand or pressure on that front to have it. At policy level, it isn't much. Then the next stage is, on the basis of policy, you work out an action plan, program, or schemes. Even at that level, there's hardly any corruption. The real corruption, and which is troublesome in countries like ours, not so much in the West, probably you are from the US, but here the problem is at the cutting edge. So when you talked about housing, when formulating a policy of the housing for the poor, there's no corruption. Then when formulating a scheme for houses, there is no corruption. But when actual delivery happens, then there is a problem. So the problem of corruption in India has more to do at the cutting edge, where the common man gets affected. So whether he goes to a thana or a tehsil for a revenue record, or for getting any allocation from the government, does he have to pay money to get that facility or the entitlement that he deserves? That is a critical matter. And there, I think a lot is happening now with use of more of digital technology. And with that, corruption levels would come down. They're already coming down. So if you digitize, so for example, I don't know how, when you left this country, in India, one of the biggest corruption was railway reservation, when it was done physically.
Yeah.
Today, you hardly have any corruption because it's all digital now. So digital transaction, if you heard me correctly during my presentation, I spoke about Samagra in Haryana. That is what they are trying to do to reduce corruption substantially through digital intervention by making processes transparent. It is the lack of knowledge, lack of information, opacity, delays that lead to corruption. If these can be cut down, instead of penalizing a corrupt person, I have always believed, build systems where corruption becomes difficult. It is happening in a number of ways. I did it personally as coal secretary, and that was considered to be one of the most corrupt sectors. We totally eliminated money out of allocation of coal blocks through a very transparent bidding process. And the money involved there was 1,70,000 crores. If you can convert that into dollars, you'll understand what I'm saying. So it can be done. It is being done, but probably more needs to be done.
Yeah, okay, it's nice to know about this. Since I actually do live in India, this accent is not from being the US.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kritik, for asking that question. Sir, very detailed explanation that you have given with respect to this general belief about what is the effort put in by India and Indian government actually to root out corruption. That's the broader question. And they try to parcel it out in terms of the situation as to how much time does it take to finish your projects. And time is directly being measured against the possibility of corruption. So that's the context in which this would have come. But yes, it is going to take time. It is increasingly becoming transparent, and there is clear reason for having hope in the government's processes and its transparency as well. So thank you very much of this. So one more question here is, what according to you needs to be done to hasten the process for seeking justice in India with the existing resources? Any comments on the justice system in India?
See, I have again written a bit about how the judicial system works, but it's a very sensitive area. You can't tell the lordship what they have to do because they keep telling others what they have to do. In a country like ours, where a Supreme Court judge can hold a press conference against the Chief Justice of India and is not held for contempt, what can you say? When the same Supreme Court judge then becomes the Chief Justice of India, what can you say? When there is a sexual harassment case against the same Chief Justice of India, and there is a compromise, I am still unable to understand how can there be a compromise in a sexual harassment case. I call it, how can there be a compromise in a compromise? If something wrong had happened, either the lady was wrong or he was wrong. There can't be a compromise, yet there was a compromise. Then the same judge becomes a member of parliament or Rajya Sabha. What can one comment on that? But I would treat it as an exception. I think judiciary is still our savior. There's some very, very fine judges. They are doing the job very well. But they need to look inwards much more than telling others what they've got to do. In India, the tendency is to keep telling others what they have to do, rather than look inwards. The problems of judiciary are not insurmountable. But unfortunately, they don't seem to be looking inwards. They're only pontificating and telling others what they've got to do. So if there is delay happening, why should high-profile cases occupy so much time of the judiciary? I mean, I can only question it. They have to do it. They keep pontificating, keep asking others. Why should, this is a huge debate. Why should judiciary treat itself different from the common man or other parts of the government? Why should it treat it? They say different treatment to us, different treatment to others. So in the selection process of the judges, they would like to keep it totally opaque and would want UPSC to explain everything to them. So you can't have double standards. I mean, there's a clear double standard going on judiciary treating itself differently. You know, the amount of corruption that is there at the district level, district courts. Something needs to be done. Is somebody doing something about it? We don't do that. So because no one can speak about the moment you do that, there's a contempt notice against you. So, okay, I can understand others should not, but they should internally do something. Has there been an improvement? There should be a debate whether there is a reduction in corruption levels in judiciary at the district level. No one even talks about it. So one has to look inwards. I mean, I am nobody to suggest to judiciary what they should do. Only suggestion I am giving is introspect. As you tell others to do things and direct others, please direct yourself to do it. Why in the hell do we have 2 months of summer vacations in India? What is the justification of having that? No, who's going to question that? There's huge pendency in judiciary. You have 1.5, 2 months summer vacation. It happened during British time because British judges had to sail to England. During summertime, it was too hot here. Then we had this. Why should we continue with this colonial tradition? Secondly, I mean, small things. Why should we be wearing, or advocates or judges be wearing those gowns and coats in this bloody heat and then air condition those rooms? I mean, we have to get a. So I'm nobody to suggest to them, but since you asked this question, I'm saying they have to introspect because I can't tell them. If I tell them, I will be held in contempt. They are not listening themselves. They still have a black coat and a gown over that. Why do you need that? You are dispensing justice, you dispense justice.
Yes, we are nobody to question them, but you have already questioned, sir. So thank you very much. I got my answer. But there is one addendum to this. Very recently, I saw a video clip on social media. The video clip consists of an officer, an IAS officer, appearing before a judge. It could be a sessional or a district, I don't really know, but the officer is standing in front of the lot and he's making his point, and there is a lawyer as well to support. In the middle of the conversation, the judge says, "Are you an IAS officer?" And the officer says, "Yes, I am. Is this the way you dress when you appear before the court?" And the officer seems to have not understood that. He was wearing a formal shirt and a pant. Is there no official dress code for you people when you appear before the courts? That was the question repeatedly asked in a rather humiliating way. I personally, I'm not from civil services, but I felt that it was little more than a normal conversation. Is there, I mean, from my understanding, I want to ask you, sir, is there a dress code for the civil servants when they appear in courts?
Not to my knowledge. He has to be decently dressed. That's it. That's how it should be in this country. I mean, I've seen people wearing 3-piece suit in searing heat. You know, a full sleeve shirt. I mean, he was not in shorts. He was not in jeans. He was wearing a full. What else? In fact, the judge should be wearing that itself. He's in India. Why should we wear ties? Ties is a Western and a colonial thing. You should be decently dressed. And what is decent can be defined. You can define that. You can't come in a lungi. You can't come in a chappals. You can say that. But you can't ask him to wear a 3-piece suit or a tie or a bandgala. No, why should it be there?
Good. So I think that was something which was circulating in the social media, and I felt it was little too much. Anyway, so related to one, some of the student probably participants are also aspirants of civil services. Therefore, there is one question related to them. They have keyed in a question. Looks like the civil services examination, the UPSC examination that they prepare for, puts them into a huge stress. Are there any suggestions how to manage our stress in the midst of UPSC preparation?
Again, Professor Rao, this is a full session. I do take a session on how to prepare for the civil service. In short, what I can say is, if those that are aspiring to become civil servants don't treat examination as a burden and enjoy the journey of appearing in the civil service exam, as I did, I enjoyed every moment of preparation. It never appeared to be a pressure on me. It never was a tension to me. is the question of your attitude towards enjoying that journey, enjoying every moment. And there are ways in which you can actually enjoy them by deriving satisfaction out of this each step that you take towards preparation, rather than looking at the mountain hill where you can be overburdened by that. But if you look at one step each and derive sense of satisfaction out of taking that step, I think the journey will become much easier.
Take the preparation not as a burden, and you enjoy, and you'll have the right mindset when you get into the service. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. There is one question that I wanted to ask myself is, what is the structure for your nexus of good which you established recently? What are the principles under which it operates? How others can participate, join, and spread this good word of, as you mentioned in the opening remarks, people who are appreciative of good should come together, and that voice should be heard much more pronounced than what it is currently. So what is the structure which
this is very simple. I set up this foundation immediately after retirement, because during the last few years of my career, I felt that good work needs to be recognized. So it's very simple. You just type Nexus of Good on Google and it will take you to the portal. And it will take you just 10 seconds to become a member of that. By doing that, you will then start getting quarterly newsletters. Almost every 2-3 days, there is a good story that is hosted on the portal. There are hundreds of good stories on the portal. Anyone can contribute a good story himself or herself on the portal. It's very simple. You can host that story, and that gets to be seen by thousands of people. So the idea is to identify, appreciate, understand, celebrate, replicate, and scale good work. So if we can identify good work, there's so much good work happening around us, but as we are fond of masala, we don't look at good work. But if we have an eye for that, we can appreciate. A small appreciation can not only encourage that person, others will start believing. One of the fundamental reasons why I did Nexus of Good was that many people don't believe that good can be done. So if you demonstrate that good is actually happening, I'm not asking you anything new, then they will start believing that good can happen because good is happening. So that's what Nexus of Good is. Very simple. We have these quarterly newsletters. We have city chapters, which some of them are very active. We have regular meetings of city chapters where good work is roadshowed, PowerPoint presentations are made. People understand how this good work is happening. But the critical part of Nexus of Good is replication and scaling of good work. It's not a one-time act. It's something which can be replicated and scaled. And secondly, I have always believed that scaling by and large can come through government. So the second fundamental feature is public-private partnership. I have believed that efficiencies come from the private domain, scale comes from the public domain. The two should come together and scale good work that is happening. That's what Nexus of Good is all about.
Amazing formula that you've given there. Efficiency perhaps comes from private, and scaling is possible with government support and the muscle. And coming together through PPP is a practicable solution for many ideas and many solutions that you work at. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much on this. This is not just very interesting and strong in terms of ideas, but it is also very practical and useful when we translate these things. And just now you mentioned many aspects: replicate and scale. And before that, celebrate, and before that, appreciate, before that, recognize, and before that, identify. Now, this also becomes a nice format or a framework for people to spread the good word in society, in small societies like your offices and workplaces, at homes, in social contexts as well. I'm only trying to look at these opportunities of how some of these distilled wise views are applicable across many domains, many spheres that we all probably are working in. It's not just in government, but in academics, in corporate, in social enterprises, everywhere. This is so much useful. That's what I'm excited about, and that's the reason I mentioned. Sir, there's one last question from my side before anybody else raises the hand, and after that, we'll probably wind it up with your permission. What do you think are the major impediments for effective implementation of IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and some governance issues in banks? At least these two major aspects. What do you think are major impediments? How it can be addressed?
See, in India, one of the biggest problems was exit. And that is exit.
Exit.
How do you get out of an issue? How do you get off a business? How do you get out? Because if you don't have an exit route, then people will think twice before entering. And that is why I think now a lot of rationalization has indeed come about in the insolvency part. But the way it is being put into operation, it has led to a second round of bureaucratic, if I called hassle. It is still getting delayed. Of course, it's much better than what it was earlier. Now the exit is not as difficult as it would say 10 years ago. There is a possibility of exit. But, you know, in such complex issues, my view when I was in government was get in touch and sit down with people who suffered and get them to formulate something. How do we solve it? You know, when people came to me with problems, I tell them, you give me the solution. You think government has, you know where the shoe pinches, so you give me the solution. So if the organizations who handle such situations come up with formulations, whether in terms of legislation or regulations or processes, they will be much more implementable. So my approach used to be, you give me the solution, then I'll tell you what is the possible problem in the government domain to implement what you're suggesting to me, and then we can come to a consensus which is much more implementable. Usually what happens in the government is, you know, sometimes some of us start feeling that we have the wisdom only. No one else has the wisdom. That's where the problem is. And that's why, if you recall earlier, I had said, take stakeholders into confidence.
Yes.
Now, if I do not have somebody, I mean, it has happened in some domains. If you have in a cricket selection board, someone who's never played cricket, what will he select? You know, using this as an example, so you have people managing public sector undertakings who have no exposure whatsoever. What will they contribute? So you have to have people who know the subject, sit with them, work it out. I'll give you a totally different example here. As Secretary of School Education, one of the biggest problems was private sector schools charging a lot of fee. Now, this was a problem. So I told private school people themselves, call them, that if I come up with the legislation, you'll have a problem. You come up with the legislation to discipline yourself. To discipline yourself. They came up with the legislation. Believe me, FICCI Arise came up with a draft legislation which was accepted by UP government and legislation passed. Why can't those people who are engaged in insolvency, they come up with the legislation or improved legislation or suggestions? So it has to be a very intensive dialogue with people who are suffering, who are engaged, who are involved. I see you can find a solution to any problem. When I was Coal Secretary, we used to jokingly say, give us the problem of Kashmir, we might be able to find a solution. The reason is that if you sit down and discuss with the stakeholders, it is not that all problems will be sorted out, but certainly you will be moving in the right direction, and the chances that you find a solution to the problem.
Amazing, sir. Amazing. Sitting down with those people who experience the pain points and asking them to throw up some solutions and evaluate those options and come up with something best which they can own. This entire process is nothing but design thinking. I think you have explained in a very, very simple language. Thank you so much, sir. Wonderful. I'll request Mr. Madhav Rao to raise his question.
First of all, thank you so much, sir, for the opportunity to interact with you. I have a basic, simple question that how far civil servants are approachable to the general public?
See, generally, it's very difficult to say because, again, if you have heard me correctly, you treat all civil servants as a monolith. There are civil servants who are accessible, who are inaccessible, who are totally unavailable. There are all sorts of people. So how do you increase the number of who are available? Appreciate who are available, appreciate who are accessible. Then others who are not so accessible will feel left out, and they will also want to be appreciated as accessible, and probably they will become accessible. That's your role. I mean, when I talk to civil servants, I speak a different language. But while speaking to you is, what can you do to make civil servants more accessible? By appreciating who are accessible. Give me a name of 2 civil servants who are accessible to you, or do you feel that everyone is inaccessible?
Yeah, like in AP, sir, we have that Spandana program where the general public normally directly interact with the district officials, right from the district magistrate.
So say that, I don't wait for my asking that question. If I were to, in your place, I would start by saying, sir, there are officers like so-and-so who are accessible, but there are many other officers who are inaccessible. How can we make them accessible? So always use a positive, reference if you want to come up with a suggestion. The reason is very simple. You go to somebody for a request. Now you tell him you are not doing anything, and then you request him, will you accept your request? You tell him, sir, so much good is happening, but so much more can happen. Can you do this? This is pure communication skill. You put somebody off by saying that nothing's going right, or you tell him a lot of it is going right, win him over, and then you tell him this also needs to be done. That's how you get things done in the government.
Great, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Madhavrao, for raising that question. Sir, we are reaching towards 8 p.m. and with your permission, we will close this. Oh God, there is one more question. If you permit, we'll take that as well. Yeah, Ghanshyamji.
Sir, I am GD Govt, ex-Chief Manager Planning HL Lucknow. I had a question that we have got the fundamental rights. What is the role of civil servants to get awareness of these fundamental rights to common persons?
It's not the job of the civil servant to make you aware of your fundamental rights. If you can't be aware of your own fundamental rights, civil servant, if they go around telling you what are your fundamental rights, they would not be able to accomplish their fundamental duties. They are assigned to do their job, let them do their job. Let them not go around telling you what are your fundamental rights. You jolly well be aware of what your fundamental rights and go and fight for them, right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghanshyamji. Thanks for that question. Sir, we have more or less completed about 1.5 hours of this conversation. This is a very, very interesting, useful conversation. In my own language, I call it blockbuster session. For the simple reason that several brilliant ideas are packed in a short span of time. And it sets us thinking, it sets us working on it, it sets us working on the applicability in our own specific domains. That's the reason it's a very, very useful one and a blockbuster session that I call. You have opened the conversation with looking at the problems and going to the root cause of the problem. And for any great idea, because ideas can come from anyone, and if those ideas have to fructify and sustain, they have to have a 7-point formula, as you suggested. I'm using these words in a different way. But those 7 points that you mentioned, the idea has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, and emotionally relatable. This is an amazing formula. And I've heard a few of these things earlier, but now it is 7. It is quite comprehensive. Thank you very much for that, sir. And the all pervasive and applicable everywhere kind of lessons that we have drawn from this session are, when you are trying to handle even your adversaries, sit with them and convey your value proposition. And your value proposition is extremely important, and that needs to be sorted out and done. And structure your communication accordingly, package it nicely so that the other person will get an opportunity to look at, even if the mind was close to looking at this idea, with this communication, with this interest that the person has taken to go there and sit down and talk, the minds will be open, gates will be open, and lots of problems will be addressed. Government is doing quite a bit. Bureaucracy or civil servants is not a monolith. Not everyone is same. The perception is changing. And in order to change that perception, our own role, the citizens will have to do, is to appreciate the good work. And this appreciation can be done on the Nexus of Good portal, where there is a format and there's an opportunity as a platform for us to come together and talk about the good work done by various people. So in society, if the good is appreciated in large numbers, I'm sure we all become very positive and optimistic. While we can be critical of the negative, we should be very appreciative of the good. I think that is something which we'll have to understand. The government, while it is trying to do away with the physical interfaces, it is going to take time, but they are much more open now than before to digital interfaces and interfaces which are leading to transparency, and transparency will have a telling tale on corruption and things like that. I think when information is available to everyone, you are more questionable. It is like a notice board on which you have committed, and therefore you will have to actually execute it. So it is that kind of transparency. Your comments on labor laws, which are much more harassing than enabling, is something that we'll have to balance it out between providing the rights to the labor vis-a-vis protecting the interests of the industry. I think the in between, the factor of doing away with the Inspector Raj or our we abhor Inspector Raj, not just in Labor Department, but in every department. I think your views are very, very pertinent and direct on that. Transparency is a very, very important aspect. It is much more possible now because of the advent of new technologies. I think that's a shot in the arm for all of us, for the society as well as for the government to make it. And when, I mean, this is applicable to everyone, including private and other spheres. Mistakes can happen, but when mistakes are done, probably you should own it up. And when you own it up, the next step is to correct those mistakes. I think that's a very, very important lesson. And policy making in government and probably in private, policy making is a very, very complex system where we'll have to draw inputs from everyone concerned. And it cannot be done overnight. It cannot be simplistic. It cannot be like some of those statements or advertisements that we usually see, but a thorough think through and touching the corners of all the aspects of the people involved is required. So that's a very, very important aspect. The other thing that you have mentioned, and it is very useful, is one should know how to handle pressure, not just the civil servants. In this case, you have promised to hold another session, but directly it's applicable to everyone other than civil servants also. There's a lot of pressure in private. There's a lot of pressure in every organization. Even in NGOs, there's a lot of pressure. We should figure out how we can handle this pressure. That's a beautiful way to handle that. But initially, someone may struggle. But once you know the variables, once you know all the people involved and things that are moving forward with some kind of analysis, I think we can come to a conclusion and say, take the pressure out of this thing and work on creating solutions and lasting solutions for the people concerned. That's a very, very important aspect. I'm not repeating the comments that you made on judiciary, but they're extremely useful in terms of the fact that we can't have double standards and we need to look inwards and solve the problems that everyone in the country is actually facing. What we preach, we also have to practice. Probably that is the lesson that we'll have to take. If I were judiciary, I would probably look deep down and inwards and come up with some solutions. So these are some of the one last point that you mentioned is about, again, the nexus of good, which I'm quite impressed with. Earlier, I watched it on social media, but I didn't actually take to it so completely into it. But yes, identify, recognize, appreciate, celebrate, replicate, and scale up the good work. I think that forms a nice responsibility on all of us when we look at the good work and when we look at transforming the society that we live in, and when we have a little bit of ambition of making it a better place for all of us to live in and work in. That's something which, and your example which you gave for handling some of the problems in one of the ministries is design thinking, especially in education department. When you were there, you had asked the concerned agency working with to come up with the solutions. I think that solution can now in the modern day can be called design thinking solutions. So it is beautiful. So many lessons that you have given us. That's why I was thanking you for this amazing session. And we would like to connect with you again, sir. We'll make a summary and share a copy of that summary with you. Once you approve it, we'll put it on the archives. We'll have the video recording as well on the archives for all those who would like to join subsequently at a convenient time. We have seen that as many people who register for these webinars, so many more are going to the archives and looking at these things and learning. So we provide both the video recording as well as a text summary of the entire conversation with nice inputs, landscaped and curated properly. Of course, with your approval, we will post it on our archives. So Professor Prasad, you have any last comment so that I can request you to wind it up?
Yeah. So for an area not so well known to us, so on which we have so many perceptions, I think it was a very enlightening session. Thank you very much, sir. And you brought all the basic principles of management and put it to center light. Looks so obvious, but we need to focus and do.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of everyone at ICFAI and also on behalf of all the participants who joined from various sectors like media, technology, education, government, all the members that who have joined, I want to thank you for this wonderful session. And we would like to go and read some of the books. I request all the members to go to Google and search for the books, and also visit Nexus of Good and participate there, as sir has mentioned. And in the meantime, I want to also mention to you that we will be meeting you again at 6:30 p.m. on next Friday, that is June 23rd, with yet another leader. Thank you once again, all of you. Good night.